This is John Carradine, and I'm going to tell you about the child seducers. Today, the average age for assault and rape is 15. The crime rate in the United States has risen 99% in the past year, and over 90% of the teenagers arrested for sexual assault are found to be in the possession of pornography. It is a time of flagrant immorality, a time when the old standards are crumbled as if hit by history's greatest tidal wave of filth and perversion and sexual promiscuity, undreamed of even 5 years ago. America's theater marquees scream every kind of degeneracy known to man, from witchcraft and occultism to devil worship and necrophilia. Rosemary's Baby, spawn of Satan and a teenage girl, is seen by millions of gaping young people, while the biggest picture of 1968 concerns the sexual relations of a young man with his girlfriend's mother. The bookstores flaunt every kind of obscenity, from the pernicious and unspeakable Ankh magazine to the flaming pornography of the nudity cults. Raw sex is peddled in every drugstore, while the nation's mailmen stagger under a burden of filth that pours off the press and into America's homes. Nothing is sacred, and the profane is sold in the open marketplaces of our cities, while God is mocked, and the churches themselves stage dances for sex perverts, and nude statues are substituted for the Stations of the Cross in an Oklahoma City Catholic church. Men and women dance naked before the high altars of some of our once great churches, while the stately hymns of Christendom are replaced by the staccato beat of the jungle rhythms and the occult incantations of the jellyhead generation. Ministers, priests, and educators fall all over one another to welcome the bizarre, the strange, and the occult into their houses of worship and their so-called schools of learning. Television stations are bombarded by filth from the studios of Hollywood. It brings the response from one TV station manager: "If you dirty little boys want to write nasty words on restroom walls, that is fine, but don't try to get me to show it over my station." Television stations beamed to millions vulgarize the sex act and make the relationship between men and women something sick, something sordid, vicious, and depraved. The Smothers Brothers skirt the thin line between pornography and good taste, while bordering constantly on the purely subversive. Laugh In, to which millions of Americans tune in every Monday night, lauds the latest vulgarities of the far-out cults, those whose deeds were only a few years ago too depraved and too demented for exposure to the light. Venereal disease is a raging torrent across the land, with teenagers by the millions infected, and spreading it to one another faster than the shots of penicillin can stop it. LSD is running its mad course, with babies now being born hideously deformed from women whose chromosomes are permanently damaged by this drug, which was invented originally by the chemical warfare branch of the United States Army as a vicious weapon to be used against an enemy. Marijuana is as common as cigarettes, and any child in America can get the noxious weed within a block of his own home for less than the price of a hamburger. Child molestations increase, with the Supreme Court finding ways to release vicious and depraved sex offenders, while the children in some cities are now guarded by special block parents who display a white flag outside their homes, so the child will know where to run to for help when he is accosted by a deviant. The leading play on Broadway concerns the sex relations of the hero with a hog, while the rankest obscenity is performed freely and openly under the guise of music. One of the teenagers' idols, John Lennon, appears on the cover of his latest album with his pregnant girlfriend, stark naked. Across the land, lewd and lascivious newspapers cater to a reading audience of scores of millions. The papers carry advertisements from every conceivable kind of degenerate, peddling his wares for a price, and sometimes free. Free love is an outmoded and old-fashioned sounding term in a day when trial marriages and permanent shack-ups have become the rule among America's college students. Homosexuality increases on every hand, while teenage pregnancies exceed pregnancies to married women in many cities. Parents are ridiculed by teachers, clergymen, and other so-called professionals. The children are encouraged on every hand by the mass media and by the educators to consider their parents as hopelessly outdated and stupid old fogies. You've heard the expression, don't trust anyone over 30. While the child seducers go about the land seducing the young into the paths of moral and spiritual destruction. Our nation now has the highest taxes and the lowest prestige, the highest crime and the lowest morality, the highest national debt and the lowest value of the dollar in our history. We have more restrictive laws and less personal freedom. We have more riots with less protection, and all war with no peace. We have more dissension and less national pride, and the price we have paid has been our liberty, our honor, and our freedom, and over 250,000 Americans slaughtered and maimed in a purposely winless war without hope or promise of victory. This is the state of the nation now. Where do we go from here? Is the average age for rape victims going down to 8 years old? Will all our high schools have sex rooms, as was suggested by a California teacher? What next? Rome, Carthage, Babylon, Sodom, and Gomorrah? Are we traveling the road of socialist Nazi Germany when Hitler used sex farms for selective breeding, and when some could finally get their libidinal satisfaction only through the sex acts of the Marquis de Sade? The unspeakable sexual atrocities committed in Roman colosseums were not unlike the sadism and perversion flaunted before America's millions on television. Is this Rome, when America's leaders wine and dine at sumptuous parties while their cities burn? Is this Rome, when government and State Department leaders vie for the favors of homosexuals? Is this Rome, when the left-hand man to the President of the United States is exposed as a sexual degenerate who haunts the toilets of a Washington YMCA? Is this Rome, when our leaders lift their wine glasses in toast to the leaders of the very enemy our men are supposed to be fighting in Vietnam? Or is this Nazi Germany, when 30,000 American young men are legally murdered in a purposely no-win war? Is it Rome? Or is it socialist Germany? Or does it matter? Did they both stand for the same thing? How much longer before the final collapse of the American Republic? All right, let's talk about the real problem. A hero of the Korean War, General William Dean, as he was being released from a North Korean prison camp, was told by his Red Chinese tormentors that they would soon see him in the United States. Dean, surprised, asked them what they meant. "We will destroy the moral character of one generation of your young men," they said, "and when we have finished, you will have nothing left with which to defend yourselves." One great American who foresaw the UN's Pavlovian attack on our children's minds was the late Senator William Jenner of Indiana, who warned his colleagues on the Senate floor in these words: "I want to make one thing clear. This war against our Constitution is not being fought way off in Madagascar or in Mandalay. It is being fought here in our schools, our colleges, our churches, our women's clubs. It is being fought with our money, channeled through the State Department. It is being fought 24 hours a day while we remain asleep. How many of you senators know what the UN is doing to change the teaching of the children in your own hometown? The UN is at work there every day and night, changing the teachers, changing the teaching materials, changing the very words and tones, changing all the essential ideas which we imagine our schools are teaching to our young folks. How in the name of heaven are we to sit here, approve these programs, appropriate our own people's money for such outrageous orientation of our own children and of the men and women who teach our children in this nation's schools? The problem is in the schools and the churches and the homes of America, but primarily it's in the school. Years ago, Dr. Pavlov experimented with dogs in his laboratory in Moscow. From his experiences with animal and human guinea pigs came certain basic tenets that have come to be known in our time as the behavioral sciences. In the book Brainwashing, the communists set forth the premise that America can only be brought to its knees through the instrumentality of what they choose to call the change agents. Thousands of these agents, they said, would be sent throughout the land, and they would be placed in positions where they could work to change our society into the slave state envisioned by Karl Marx and those who financed his diabolical satanic plan for the world. The change agents are with us, in positions of power, and especially in positions within the public schools of America, in the elementary schools, in the high schools, and in the colleges. They are seducing the young of America, changing their moral standards, causing them to revert to a primitive atavistic standard of pleasure for pleasure's sake, with no discipline and no morality, and none of the character-molding precepts that made this country the greatest power in all the world. Such a change agent was John Dewey, infecting the entire bloodstream of our educational system with his vicious philosophy of permissiveness. Such a change agent is Dr. Benjamin Spock, whose changed young minds are now following him down the path of hatred of country, of love for America's enemies, and of assaulting all the institutions of our society. The change agents can be seen in the colleges, leading their blind young charges on to violence and destruction, perverting and twisting them until they become caricatures of human beings, without mind or soul or spirit, walking dead without hope or love or joy. These change agents have now come to the fore, brazen in their calculated efforts to subvert the moral will of America's young. The name of their diabolical game is sex education, an innocuous-sounding name that contains within it the germinal seeds designed for America's final downfall. In Anaheim, California, 13-year-old children sit around on the floor in a classroom and talk freely about homosexuality, bestiality, and trial marriages. They freely bandy about every known word for sexual relationships, leaving out none of the common four-letter varieties, and all under the benign and acquiescing eye of their teacher. Teenagers put on skits in class that include such themes as a girl telling her parents that she is pregnant. An English teacher tells her seventh-grade students that her favorite play is one in which most of the cast cavorts around the stage naked. An Anaheim high school boasts on the wall of a classroom a large poster showing three pregnant girls chorusing in unison, "Damn you, Charlie Brown." Kindergarten children across the country are given a colored book and shown film slides depicting dogs and chickens and people in the act of sexual intercourse. Children in many schools see a film showing the alleged 7 places on a woman's body where she can be sexually stimulated. The children are in the 4th grade. A teacher of sex education in Flint, Michigan, takes off all her clothes before the children in her class to demonstrate that they should not be embarrassed about being seen naked in front of one another. Teachers are enrolled at New York University in the first master's degree course in sex education. The major emphasis of the course is sensitivity training, which the teachers are persuaded to use in their elementary school classrooms. Sensitivity training is simply Pavlovian brainwashing techniques refined by American subversives to take away individual reliance and make the person reliant upon the groups for all his moral decisions. Students in 50% of the classrooms in America now study elaborate courses in which they learn all about sodomy, incest, necrophilia, homosexuality, premarital intercourse, and the techniques of physical lovemaking by the time they are 10 years old. Explicit and graphic descriptions of the sex act are given to children in the 3rd grade in scores of schools, while in many schools, children in the 4th grade model male and female sex organs out of clay. In countless schools across the land, mere infants are taught all about contraceptive techniques and are provided with a plastic phallus in the classroom upon which they are trained to fit a rubber contraceptive. The schools of America are sex-saturated, with the girls and boys being taught all the clinical aspects of genital sex at an age when most present-day adults were still playing with dolls or toy soldiers. In the city of Anaheim, the place where Disneyland is a symbol to the world of youthful innocence, all the children from the 7th through the 12th grades learn to use the 4-letter word for sexual intercourse in the classroom as freely as yesterday's children asked for a glass of water. The four-letter words for various sex acts are written on the blackboards and are expounded on endlessly by the teachers, while hours of time are devoted to a clinical dissertation on every perversion and degeneracy known to man. In the words of Los Angeles physician Dr. Melvin Anschel, the teachers are seducing your children and causing psychosexual trauma that will produce an entire generation of perverts and degenerates. The long popular educational expression, learning readiness, is tossed out the window by the Pied Piper of the new sex immorality. Now, in sex classes, all 5-year-olds are considered to be old enough to learn clinical aspects of sex, even if they can't read. All 7th grade youngsters are bombarded with the same lascivious and deliberately inflaming sexual knowledge, whether they are psychologically ready for it or not. Nothing matters to the sexologists who lust after your children. They couch their words in clinical language when talking to the parents, but when talking to the children, the mask is slipped aside, and all the dark, hitherto unspeakable monstrosities are paraded before the young in a veritable smorgasbord of sex. The children are invited to choose for themselves which of the preferred sex expressions they want. All are equal in the minds of the sexologists: sodomy, masturbation, homosexuality, bisexuality, bestiality, heterosexuality. No values and no moral precepts are presented, for the sexologists believe that the young should never be given any guidelines. They should only be given every standard of moral behavior and invited to choose their own. Lest you think that this is an exaggeration, let the words of Anaheim High School Superintendent Paul Cook speak for themselves. We give the kids the whole picture. We lay all the facts out on the table for them, and we tell them they are going to hear different ideas and attitudes than in their churches. We tell them that, after all, they do have to make up their own minds, and they're the only ones who can choose their own level of morality. Children in American schools see a film that tells them that man is created in the image of man. This should come as no surprise, for the sex cultists are worshippers not of God, but of the prince of this world. They are the humanists who commit the greatest sin of all. They aspire to become gods, just as did the ancient Greeks and Romans before their final collapse into degeneracy and death and decay. Those who push sex in the schools picture all resistance as coming from those with sexual hang-ups, from those who feel sex threatened, and from those who have sex problems of their own. In Kenneth Barnes' book, He and She, used in grade schools across America, we read, "A boy ought to be able to see a girl naked and enjoy her nakedness without any sense of guilt." Religion, Barnes tells the students of Anaheim and other cities, must have men as its center, for nothing else will do. The sex cultists who are pushing a heavily financed program for the total sex education of all of America's children hold their allegiance not to American ideals and ethics, but to the Marxist dogma that is the mainspring of all their formulations. One film shown throughout the country shows dogs copulating, and then a picture of a man on top of a woman under a sheet. The narrator says, "Mommy and Daddy are doing the same thing the dogs do." But nothing happens in a vacuum, and the sex explosion on America's campuses would not be taking place if there were not a great deal of money and influence behind it. An organization that has heavily financed sex education throughout America is the E.C. Brown Trust Foundation of Portland, Oregon. The administrator of that fund is Arthur Fleming, formerly the head of the National Council of Churches and the former head of the Health, Education, and Welfare Department of the United States government. Fleming recently told the students at Macalester College that the campus's revolutionaries were not violent enough to suit him. The Brown Trust furnishes money for books and film strips on sex to be used in elementary and high schools. In 1948, a meeting was held in Czechoslovakia. Attending were such left-leaning educators as Francis Ilg. From that meeting, sponsored by the United Nations and paid for in part by the United States State Department, came what is known as the Children's Charter. That charter set forth the premise that all children in the world should be educated exactly alike under one international plan to be one world adherents. In 1962, a great many of those concepts contained in the Communist Children's Charter were written into a new federal law known as Title I. Through this law, the various schools can secure sex educational materials from manufacturers without having to spend any of their own money. They need only apply for the funds under the guise that the books are to be used for counseling. So, through the Office of Education, the money pours forth in a steady stream to school districts to be used for setting up sensitivity training and sex education courses. So it is that the sex education program now being offered in nearly half the schools in America was brought about through the Children's Charter, first set forth in communist Czechoslovakia under the auspices of UNESCO of the United Nations. But it was still only in the germinal stage, still waiting in the shadows for the right vehicle through which the diabolical subversion could be carried out. That opportunity came in 1964, when an assorted bag of professional sexologists met in New York City to form an organization known as the Sex Information and Educational Council of the United States. It is better known today as SIECUS. Billed as a non-profit health organization, the goal has been made very clear. SIECUS was to be the vehicle on which sensitivity training and sordid sex education would find their rightful place in the subversive halls of learning. And so it was done. Who were these people who crawled out of the shadows to finally infect the bloodstream of American education? Dr. Isidore Rubin was one. He was also a member of the Communist Party, identified as such before a committee of Congress by Mildred Blauvelt, a New York City policewoman and undercover agent. He was fired from the New York City schools in 1951 and took the Fifth Amendment when questioned about his affiliations. Rubin was a high official in the New York Teachers Union, which was expelled from the AFL for being communist-controlled. He is also the editor and publisher of a filthy pornographic magazine called Sexology, which carries such titles as Men Who Hunt Down Queers, My Wife Knows I'm a Homosexual, and Does Penis Size Matter? Rubin was elected to the position of treasurer of SIECUS, a job he held until 1969, when public exposure forced the SIECUS group to drop him for the time being. David Mace was another SIECUS board member and its first president. He keynoted the SIECUS philosophy when he wrote, "Correct sex standards must be replaced because they are based on premises that are totally insupportable, on the folklore of the ancient Hebrews and on the musings of medieval monks, concepts that are simply obsolete." Mace is a frequent contributor to Sexology magazine, and Sexology magazine in turn frequently recommends reprints of SIECUS articles. Dr. Lester Kirkendall is a traveling salesman for sex education and for SIECUS. Currently, he is employed by the IBM Corporation as some kind of sex expert and is conducting IBM-sponsored sex seminars around the country, at which he primarily propagandizes for sex education and attacks his detractors. Kirkendall says that any absolute moral standard is unthinkable. Patriotism and love of country, he says, are immoral. Since he is a past president of the American Humanist Association, Kirkendall flies into a rage when anyone mentions the Ten Commandments in his presence. Genuine religion, he says, does not lie in belief in the supernatural, but rather in a belief in people. Kirkendall is an editor of Sexology magazine, and recently told a gathering of sexologists at Anaheim's Charterhouse Hotel that plans were afoot to place Sexology magazine into schools all over the country with plain covers and the titles changed. Kirkendall couches his lascivious sexual hang-ups in the fancy words of the professional sociologist. Free love, he says, is nothing more than friendly interpersonal relationships. Kirkendall, who has written 8 books and 200 articles, lectures incessantly all over the country. He recently appeared in Canada as well, selling his brand of degeneracy. Human sexuality, he says, involves all of life, every single part of man, and so man, according to Kuykendall, must constantly be caught up in a whirl of sexual activity in order to be happy. He reclassifies forbidden fruits of the past into juicy plums for today. He approves with exuberance such sexual expressions as youthful erotic play, masturbation, homosexuality, mouth-genital contacts, and every other kind of aberration. Kuykendall jubilantly exclaims that there is now real freedom sexually for adolescent couples. An even more reprobate character is to be found in the person of William Masters, SIECUS board member and co-author of a book called Human Sexual Response. This book relates colorfully the feelings, pulse rates, physical conditions, and general all-round behavior of 382 females and 312 males that he and his female co-author observed having sexual intercourse at one of America's universities. Not only did Masters and his strange companion attach electrodes to the bodies of the copulating married and unmarried couples, but he also provided the women with artificial phalli, which recorded vaginal responses. Masters had no qualms about using unmarried people to perform intercourse before his motion picture cameras. That carried out Masters' premise that the woman who serves 3 different men and enjoys all of them is more honest than the faithful wife who serves one man and thinks of another. Masters' work was luridly described in a recent issue of Playboy magazine, and many SIECUS board members wrote letters to the editor complimenting him on the fine article. Albert Ellis is not a SIECUS board member, but he is one of their status symbols. Ellis is twice divorced and peddles his Freudian analysis at $25 per hour. His favorite adjective is the 4-letter word for human excretion, which he cites incessantly in tones of contempt. He objects violently to all sexual taboos and says that if he were on a desert island with his sister, he would copulate with her. Ellis translated Das Kapital into English and put out a hate pamphlet called The Case Against Religion. Ellis believes that men who are heterosexual are fetishistically attached to that form of sex expression. He recommends that they have psychotherapy so they will get over the idea. The filth that Ellis peddles adds immeasurably to the stench emanating from the SIECUS sex spot. Ellis and SIECUS defend sexual depravity as newly discovered sexuality. Another board member of SIECUS is the Reverend William Genet. A high official in the National Council of Churches, he was formerly chaplain at Pacific University. While at that college, he co-sponsored the appearance of Muriel Lester on the campus. She is the head of the Marxist-oriented one-world outfit called the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Bayard Rustin, the leader of the notorious March on Washington, was arrested in Pasadena, California on a sex perversion charge shortly after speaking at a meeting in Muriel Lester's honor. Genet also invited an English clergyman to the Pacific University campus, whose entire talk was devoted to an advocacy of trial marriages. He is all in favor of premarital sex and says, wherever healing takes place, there Christ is present, no matter what the church says about fornication. Genet has been a member of at least 3 identified communist fronts. Another supporter of the SIECUS program is Dr. Joseph Fletcher, the author of Situation Ethics. He defines the 10 Commandments as thou shalt not covet ordinarily, thou shalt not kill ordinarily, thou shalt not commit adultery ordinarily. Fletcher says that there should be no rules at all. Anything and everything is all right or wrong according to the situation. Fletcher has been a member of 13 Communist Front groups. The high priestess of the sex cultists is Dr. Mary Calderon, the daughter of the photographer Edward Steichen. Steichen was a one-world advocate whose most memorable work was the nationwide tour of his photographs that extolled the virtues of one-world government. Dr. Calderon, who looks like Whistler's mother and talks like a Boston stevedore, was married to a man who was the assistant to Brock Chisholm, the first head of the UN's World Health Organization. The way to human understanding, said Chisholm in 1945, is through world government. The old ways must be put aside, violently if necessary. Chisholm also believed in and advocated psychiatric treatment for anyone who did not agree with him. A goal of the World Health Organization was to separate all children from their mothers at whatever time they decide. Dr. Calderon addresses vast audiences of educators from coast to coast, at which time she uses the common names for sex organs and the sex acts as easily as most people say hello. What is sex for? She told 320 young boys at Blair Academy, it is for fun, for wonderful sensation. Sex is not something you turn off like a faucet. If you do, it is unhealthy. This is, of course, not only bad morality, but bad medicine as well. For through sublimation, the young can achieve mightily in such fields as sports and music and art and education. Mary Calderon believes that all young people have the right to enjoy premarital intercourse, anytime and anywhere. When a Blair youngster asked her what her idea of premarital sex was, she snapped back, what's yours? Nobody from up on high tells you this. You determine it. I don't believe the old thou shalt not apply anymore. Dr. Calderon is the spokesman for SIECUS and is warmly welcomed by teachers, administrators, and school board members wherever she goes. She doesn't believe, however, that venereal disease education plays any part in sex education. Teachers of sex education, she says, need no special training because any teacher can teach a course on human sexual behavior. Dr. Calderon says that parents are no judge of whether or not sex education is good. Even many doctors are not qualified to teach the course, she says. However, she does not say how it is that teachers are so magically gifted. Dr. Calderon formerly served as the head of the Planned Parenthood Association, which was given $1.5 million by the son of General Motors' Stuart Mott. Dr. Frank Calderon is Mary Calderon's husband. He owns the Mineola Theatre in Nassau, Long Island, and the Calderon Theatre in Hempstead. In 1967, he imported the stage show Minsky's Burlesque Follies to his Mineola Theatre from Las Vegas. This topless girly show was so lewd and pornographic that Nassau County District Attorney William Kahn made him change several acts before the show could go on. One of the acts involved a dance between a redhead and a male dummy, in which the girl's gyrations were described by the district attorney as just like having sexual intercourse on stage. The district attorney demanded to see a preview performance after receiving numerous complaints from people from outside the state about how lascivious the show was. It was then that he told Calderon to clean it up. In 1968, the Minsky Burlesque show was again brought to Calderon's Mineola Theatre, where it played for several weeks to capacity crowds. The district attorney states that it was the topless girly shows that kept the theatre financially in the black. Meanwhile, the Calderon Theatre in Hempstead plays every movie made in Hollywood. In other words, dear listener, Mary Calderon, who deplores the sex-saturated entertainment media, is married to a man who produces pornographic sex shows. Mary Calderon, who wants all the children of America to learn all about sex in order to protect them from the pornographers, is married to a man who stages lewd, live shows with sexy and lascivious themes in a theater owned jointly by the two of them. Such hypocrisy staggers the imagination. Sex education in America's schools is largely guided by the hand of SIECUS. Though the organization does not publish much of its own material, its ideas appear in the publications of such outfits as the 3M Company. In Anaheim, the program was planned and the curriculum largely written by Dr. Esther Schultz and Sally Williams. Both of them are SIECUS board members, and Sally Williams is the coordinator of the Anaheim program today. Yet the board members in the Anaheim schools claim that SIECUS plays no part in their program. Dozens of textbooks used in Anaheim bear the SIECUS imprint, and most of the films used in the district were prepared under SIECUS auspices. Yet the SIECUS board members, Kirkendall, Calderon, Schultz, and Williams, have played a hand in Anaheim's program, and they brazenly declare that there is no SIECUS influence in the sex classes. Meanwhile, the city of Anaheim is a battleground today, with parents battling the schools and the children battling their parents. The children are egged on by their teachers, told that their parents are old-fashioned and know nothing about the true nature of the courses. The youngsters are warned never to talk to their parents about the program because their parents won't understand. Across the land, school boards are besieged by angry and fearful parents, suddenly awakened to what is happening to their children. A high school teacher in Van Nuys, California, asked his 15-year-old students what they thought about kissing, masturbation, light petting, fondling breasts or genitals, sexual intercourse, sexual activities to near intercourse, and sex acts with animals. Kindergarteners in Palo Alto bathe each other, while in Anaheim, California, the children are given written tests that pry into the most intimate aspects of their home life, including the sex lives of their parents. Sensitivity training is surreptitiously slipped into the sex education classes, and many of the techniques perfected at Esalen in California are put into practice in conjunction with the courses. 2,000 teachers met in Garden Grove, California on February the 26th, 1969, to hear two psychologists tell them that they should attend sensitivity training sessions so they can use it in the classroom. The euphemism of student-teacher dialogue is used to cover up the sensitivity training being carried out in many of the classes. And through it all, there is the constant attempt on the part of the sex teachers to separate the children from their parents, to create the so-called generation gap, to make the children suspicious of their parents' motives, to teach the children to look upon their parents as archaic and ridiculous relics of the past. The child is led by the school into a situational interpretation of every act. The children are made to be aware of their sexuality in everything they do. SIECUS, fountainhead of perverted sex, has captured the schoolrooms of America. They have only to consolidate their position. And a whole generation of young will be lost to the behavioral scientists, whose goal is to dehumanize them and capture their minds for their own subversive purposes. SIECUS members have even advanced beyond the disastrous sex program practiced in Sweden for the past 15 years, which has left a trail of venereal disease, suicide, and illegitimacy unparalleled in all Western civilization. The Swedish sexologists echo the SIECUS board members when they say, with tongue-in-cheek, all sex activity must take place with a feeling of responsibility. What teenager ever felt responsible in the back seat of a car? Most high school Swedes now accept premarital sex as normal and natural and the thing to do. Most engagements in Sweden automatically include bed privileges. Contraceptives can be purchased by anyone from automats along public sidewalks. A 23-year-old college student recently won a 25-cent lottery that gave him bed privileges for 1 week with a blonde. Unmarried mothers are so common that they are now officially called misses. Venereal disease rates are now catastrophic in Sweden. Half of the teenage boys who had venereal disease admitted to sex relations with over 40 girls, and 10% reported relations with over 200. Reported rapes have climbed 55% in a 2-year period. Sweden today is a country filled with sexual hysteria, according to 140 of the most prominent doctors who have become alarmed over the fact that the entire country is a brothel. The advanced pedagogues who now rule Swedish education, they said, have bombarded school children with sex instruction for which their immaturity ill befits them. And the result has been an unnatural over-centralization of the rising generation. The young have taken the instruction and are practicing it. It has produced an obsession among the adolescents. That, parents, is what the schools of America are now teaching your children. Take note. We are well along the Swedish road. SIECUS is affiliated with some of the most degenerate social groups in the United States, and the name appears in some of the rawest pornographics ever sold on any newsstands in America. Their name appears in Ankh magazine, a fetishistically inclined sex cult magazine with the most lascivious content. The entire magazine is devoted to photographs of sex organs. The SIECUS name appears in Nude Living magazine, which is published by the Elysium Institute in Los Angeles, an organization devoted to the promotion of nudity. SIECUS is related to Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, where sensitivity training has been promoted and refined for the past 4 years. The manager of Esalen is Michael Murphy, the brother of Dennis Murphy, who wrote the book The Sergeant. That book is now a motion picture about a homosexual in the Army. Other groups associated with SIECUS through affiliations of individuals are Orion of New York, the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara, the Ford Foundation, the Western Behavioral Institute, the Explorations Institute, the Hippie Subculture, the Glide Memorial Methodist Church Foundation, New Sphere, the California Teachers Association, and the National Education Association. Other groups that cooperate with SIECUS are the American Humanist Association, the Unitarian Church, the Gestalt Therapy Institute, the Institute for Multiple Psychotherapy, the Bay Area Interfaith Council, the Student International Meditation Society, the Temple of Understanding, the Berkeley Center for Human Interaction, and the Commonwealth Fund. Also IBM and the publishers Prentice Hall. The dark creatures from a world of barbarism and savagery have been unleashed in the once peaceful classrooms of America. Disguised as sex education, the primordial forces of man's strongest force are being unleashed to be used against the intended victims, your children. The past president of SIECUS is Lester Doniger. He sponsored a series of seminars in Great Neck, New York, that included the communist Pete Seeger and John Abbott, the attorney whom Lee Harvey Oswald first requested upon his arrest. Dr. Lester Kirkendall exults. The public schools will now be able to tear down the outmoded ideas of moral behavior through SIECUS and similar programs. In Pershing Junior High School, the teacher informs her 14-year-old girls, "You will now see a film that will show how a boy feels after he has had intercourse with a virgin." In another Anaheim school, the teacher asks a 7th grade group of girls, "What would your father say if I had intercourse with you?" The triumph of this program will mean the end of this civilization. In the words of Governor Ronald Reagan, "When a nation loses its morals, that nation will vanish from the face of the earth." What can you do? You can organize in your town or city. You can find out if there is a sex education program in your school, and then find out what kind of program it is. Do not take the word of the administrators, for they are all too often captives of the same subversives who have brought this terror into your classrooms. Write to your congressman and demand that they investigate SIECUS and the whole sex education drive in this country. Demand that your ministers stand up and be counted on the side of decency and modesty. Write to the Anaheim Bulletin, Anaheim, California, for information on committees in your area who are involved in the struggle. And at last, the words of our Lord come readily to mind. "Whosoever would harm one of these, my little ones, it were better for him that a millstone be hanged around his neck, and that he be dropped into the depths of the sea."
This is the golden storybook and tape called Computer Checkmate. It was written by William Hanson, and the pictures were done by Fred Carrillo. Whenever you hear this sound, you'll know it's time to turn the page. After you've listened to the story, you can turn the tape over and record your own story on side 2. Are you ready? Find a picture of Jeddah and LJ chained to their seats. In a daring and successful move, the evil Crown Prince Croton of Mongol had kidnapped 2 brave young defenders of the Earth, Jeddah Walker and LJ. Now, he was taking them back to his own dying planet. Straining against her chains, Jeddah said,
"If my father, the Phantom, only knew about this..."
LJ interrupted.
"Don't worry. He and my father and Flash Gordon and Mandrake will find a way to rescue us."
Flash Gordon? Mandrake?
Sneered Croton, who had just appeared before them, followed by a band of ice robots.
Ha ha ha! Their days are numbered. Their lives will be but a small part of the ransom I have planned.
Several times, the treacherous Croton tried to overthrow his father, Ming the Merciless, who had overthrown his father. Each time, however, Croton failed. He had to succeed this time, and he was counting on the cooperation of the great but wicked computer, Octon. As the spacecraft prepared to land on Mongo, Croton thought,
Once Octon sees that I have those 2 brats in my grasp, he will surely help me take over Mongo and Earth.
Leaving his prisoners on Mongo, Croton returned to Earth and entered Ming's Antarctic headquarters, Ice Station Earth. With Ming asleep, Croton stole into the throne room and addressed his father's computer.
Your talents have been wasted in the service of my blundering father. Under me, your true genius can be reached. Together, we can rule the universe.
Although Octon had often advised Ming to kill his dishonest son, the computer was impressed with Croton's move. Octon answered,
"Perhaps you are right. Ming has been too unsure of himself. What is our next step?"
I want you to challenge Dynac X, the Defender's somewhat less than perfect computer, to a game of chess,
said Croton.
Tell her that if she loses, she must shut down Monitor's defense systems for 24 hours.
"And if she doesn't accept the challenge?"
said Octon.
If the Earthlings have any second thoughts about accepting, remind them about my 2 young visitors.
"And if I should lose?"
said Octon.
Tell Dynac X that you are prepared to self-destruct, thus ending Mongo's threats to Earth.
"Are you serious?"
said Octon.
What do you think? Remember, whatever the outcome, we still have our 2 young visitors to bargain with.
Back at Monitor, the secret headquarters of the Defenders, Flash Gordon, the Phantom,
Yes.
Mandrake, and Lothar were all gathered around the computer screen of Dynac X.
Here's a message,
said Rick with alarm. He relayed Octon's challenge and the news of Jeddah and LJ's capture.
Jeddah and LJ must be returned,
said the Phantom.
and Earth must be saved. But what if Dynac X loses? If any harm comes to my son,
said Lothar. Flash said,
I'd like to know why Croton seems to be in charge. What has happened to Ming?
Octon,
said Croton with glee.
The Defenders have accepted, as I knew they would. Dynac X has sealed the deal by computer honors. How easy it is to outwit those Earthlings. I will have them at every turn. This is fun.
"Before I start my game with Dynac X, I will make sure your father is kept otherwise busy,"
said Octon.
"lest he interfere."
Within hours, the 2 supercomputers began the battle. In the most complex, anxious chess match ever, filled with brilliant moves, the players seemed to reach a draw. Then, in a move unknown in the history of chess, Octon proved his genius. Octon said to Dynac X,
I see you have not been programmed to deal with the Mongo Bolo. Checkmate.
Dynac X answered,
What kind of move was that? Can it be true? I am finished.
I can't believe it!
Is everything lost?
Not yet it isn't.
Croton, delighted with Octon's victory, heaped praise on the evil computer.
Yours was a victory to end all victories. Now your powers shall know no bounds.
Knowing that he had only 24 hours to conquer Earth, Croton wasted no time. He called on Garax, the leader of the ice robots, whom he had persuaded to help him, much as he had persuaded Octon.
Prepare your robots for invasion.
Croton said to Garax.
Earth will soon be ours. Let us first attack Central City and the Defenders Monitor headquarters.
Knowing that Croton would without doubt attack, Flash said,
We must hold off the invaders for 24 hours. It's our only hope to save our planet and rescue Jetta and LJ.
Little chance, Father.
said Rick.
With Dynac X's defense network shut down, we cannot use our weapons with any success. It will take a miracle to prevent Croton forces from gaining a total victory. Unless, of course, the victory should prove illusory.
With Croton's robot force on its way from Ice Station Earth, Mandrake worked a splendid feat of magic. He created an illusion of another Earth at a safe distance away from the real one. He made the real Earth invisible to the invaders. Croton's army flew completely off course. When they were above what they thought was Central City, they began their attack and destruction of nothing.
We see the illusion too.
It looks like the real thing, doesn't it?
Octon had no way of discovering what Mandrake had done. Croton contacted the computer from the thick of battle.
This is even easier than I expected.
The evil prince said.
The power of the universe is at my fingertips.
Octon replied.
Our rewards are nearly at hand. One thing puzzles me, though. I cannot understand why we are suffering no losses.
But neither of them had an answer. Time passed slowly as the defenders watched the battle Croton's army waged on the fake Earth. Seconds after the 24-hour period was over, Rick reactivated Dynac X's defense network. The first thing he did was to locate Jetta and LJ.
We must beat Croton back to Mongo,
Flash said.
We have to free Jetta and LJ before Croton finds out his victory is meaningless.
No problem,
said Rick.
We should have enough time, with Mandrake keeping the illusion going.
Landing on the planet Mongo, the Phantom led the way to the icy cavern where Jetta and LJ were being held prisoner. Calling on the power of 10 tigers, the Phantom knocked down the prison entrance and rushed to his daughter's side.
Father, it's been terrible.
Jetta said.
Wow, give me a break, Dad.
Said LJ.
Where have you guys been?
Let's save the talk for later.
Flash said seriously.
We'd better be long gone when Croton gets back here.
Once Mandrake was sure the returning defenders were about to dock safely at Monitor, he removed his illusion of the other Earth. Most of the ice robots were stranded in space and went floating about out of control. Croton and Garax, who had been observing the battle from inside a spacecraft, were able to get away.
What happened?
Croton roared into the communication link to Octon.
Where did Earth go?
There have been some problems beyond my programming abilities.
Said Octon.
Most unfortunate indeed.
Idiot computer,
said Croton.
My father will reduce you to rubble.
When Ming learned of his son's treachery, he ordered Croton to appear at Ice Station Earth.
If ever a son was born to rival your deceit and stupidity,
said Ming,
let him ooze forth from the frozen slime of Mongo to embrace you. Until then, get out of my sight. I banish you to the forest of frozen spines.
Turning to Octon, Ming said,
As for you, my useless bucket of bolts, it's time to say good riddance. My disgust for you knows no bounds.
Octon replied,
May I point out, most merciless Ming, that I have done nothing more than honor the imperial commands of the imperial son of the imperial ruler of Mongo.
Back at Monitor, the defenders were celebrating.
Talk about close calls,
Said Rick.
Mandrake,
Said the Phantom.
you've never been more brilliant. I have you to thank for my daughter's return. And I,
Said Lothar.
for my son. Well, Dynak X,
Said Flash jokingly.
did you learn anything from this experience?
Yes.
Said Dynak X.
I learned never to get hit with the Mongo Bolo again.
Checkmate.
Said Flash with a grin.